They laughed at my gift before it even touched the table. My wife didn't just call it worthless. She bent down, picked it up between two fingers, and dropped it on the floor like trash. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I walked out of the reception hall, crossed the parking lot, and handed it to a homeless man by the road. 30 minutes later, someone screamed my name, and the wedding I had paid for emotionally for years began to fall apart. I still remember the smell of that place before everything broke. Warm wood, polished glass, rosemary from the catering trays drifting through the air. It was one of those restored barn venues people book when they want rustic charm without any actual dirt. String lights hung from exposed beams glowing soft and forgiving, like the whole night had been filtered through nostalgia. My wife loved places like that. They photographed well. I stood near the edge of the reception hall, hands folded loosely in front of me, watching guests drift from cocktail hour to their assigned tables. Linen dresses, tailored suits, laughter that came easy because nothing was at stake for them. To most of them, I was just the man standing beside my wife, quiet, graying at the temples, well-dressed enough not to raise questions. No one asked how long I'd known the bride. No one asked how I fit into the family. That was normal. In my jacket pocket, I felt the thin rectangular weight of what I'd brought. Not heavy, not impressive, just present. It pressed lightly against my ribs every time I breathed in, like a reminder I hadn't imagined the years leading up to this night. My wife Carol moved through the room like she owned it. She smiled wide, laughed loud, touched arms when she spoke. She had perfected that performance years ago, warm, capable, admired. The kind of woman people trusted immediately because she made them feel included. When her eyes flicked toward me, the smile tightened, just a fraction, a silent warning. Don't make this about you. I'd learned to read that look early in our marriage. It wasn't anger, it was control delivered politely. Her daughter, my stepdaughter, stood near the head table with her new husband, accepting congratulations. Emily looked beautiful. She always did when she needed to. Ivory dress hair pinned just loose enough to seem effortless. She hugged relatives, thanked friends, laughed at the right moments. When she saw me, her smile softened, but didn't widen. Respectful, distant, the way you smile at someone you don't fully trust to stay in your life. I waited, I always waited. I didn't bring a speech. I didn't bring a check in a gold envelope. I didn't bring anything flashy enough to interrupt the flow of the night. I told myself that was maturity. That was restraint. But if I'm honest, it was practice. I approached when there was a gap, when Emily's mother stepped away to greet someone important, and the photographer adjusted his lens. I pulled the item from my pocket, held it out quietly. For you, I said. No rush. Open it later. Emily looked down. Her brows drew together just slightly. She recognized immediately that it wasn't the kind of gift people gave at weddings like this. No ribbon, no box, just an old flat booklet inside a plain paper sleeve. Before she could speak, Carol reappeared. What's that? She asked, already reaching. Emily hesitated. That was all it took. Carol took it from her hand, flipped it over once, and laughed. Not a giggle. A sharp, amused sound meant to draw attention. Oh my God, she said. Are you serious? The people closest to us turned. Curiosity rippled outward. She opened it enough to see the worn cover, the faded lettering, the thing most people under 40 wouldn't even recognize. This, she said, holding it up. This is what you brought. Her eyes cut to me, bright, daring me to respond. I didn't. She shook her head, bent slightly, and dropped it to the floor. Worthless, she said, honestly. The word landed harder than the object. I felt it in my chest, not like pain, but like something finally snapping into place. There was a beat of silence, not long, just long enough. I looked at Emily. Her mouth opened, then closed. She glanced at her mother, then at me. Her bouquet trembled slightly in her hands. I bent down, picked the booklet up, and brushed imaginary dust from the cover. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I'll take care of it, I said to no one in particular. Carol rolled her eyes. Someone laughed, nervous, automatic. The music swelled as if on cue. I turned and walked out. The night air hit my face like a reset. Cooler, cleaner. The sounds of the party dulled behind me, replaced by crickets and the hum of distant traffic. I crossed the gravel parking lot without looking back. By the fence near the road, a man sat on an overturned bucket. Thin jacket, gray beard, a plastic bag at his feet. He looked up as I approached, wary but alert. I held the booklet out. "This is yours," I said. He frowned. "Sir." "Just take it," I said. "And if anyone asks, tell them you found me." He looked at the cover, then at me, then slowly reached out. I went back inside before he could ask another question. 30 minutes later, someone screamed my name. And nothing was the same after that. I didn't always know how to leave a room like that. Quietly, cleanly, without dragging my pride behind me like a torn coat. That skill took years. When I married Carol, I believed the word partnership meant something solid, two people standing side by side, even when things were uncomfortable. I was 42, then old enough to have learned a few hard lessons, young enough to think I could still rewrite parts of my life that hadn't turned out the way I'd planned. Carol had been widowed young. She spoke about it rarely, but when she did, people listened. Loss gave her gravity. It made her admirable. She had raised Emily mostly on her own, built a career in real estate, learned how to walk into a room and take it over without ever raising her voice. I admired that about her. I still do, if I'm honest. What I didn't understand at first was how much her world depended on appearances, and how little room there was in it for anything that didn't photograph well. I came from a different kind of life. My father worked maintenance at a public school for 30 years. My mother kept our books balanced down to the dollar, writing everything in pencil so she could erase mistakes without wasting paper. Money to us wasn't something you talked about loudly. It was something you respected quietly. I carried that into adulthood. I worked steady jobs. I showed up early. I paid bills on time. I didn't chase promotions that came with titles, but no stability. When I saved slowly, deliberately, the way my parents had taught me, brick by brick, even when no one else could see the house taking shape. Carol saw that as smallness. She never said it outright. That wasn't her style. Instead, she'd smile when her friends talked about investment properties and say things like, "Well, not everyone thinks big," or "Some people are just more comfortable staying where they are." At dinner parties, she'd introduce me by my first name, only never my job. "This is Mark," she'd say, hand light on my arm, as if my work didn't belong in the room. At home, it was different. Not cruel, just diminishing. "You should speak up more," she'd say. "You let people walk all over you. You don't really understand how things work at my level." I learned the rhythm quickly. In public, I was the supportive husband. In private, I was a project she never quite finished fixing. Emily grew up watching that dynamic. She was polite to me always, thanked me when I drove her places, said please and thank you. But there was an invisible line between us, drawn early and reinforced often. I wasn't her father. I wasn't even her backup. I was the man her mother married after the important part of her life was already over. Still, I tried. I showed up to school events, paid for braces without complaint, co-signed on her first apartment when Carol asked me to. I didn't expect gratitude. I expected decency. What I got instead was tolerance. The family gatherings were the worst. Carol's sister Janet had a way of asking questions that sounded like concern, but landed like inspections. Still at the same place, must be nice not to worry about competition. You ever think about doing something more ambitious? Carol never corrected her. She'd sip her wine and let the silence answer for her. I told myself it didn't matter. That dignity was internal. That respect didn't need witnesses. But 12 years of that kind of erosion changes a person. It doesn't break you loudly. It hollows you out carefully until you realize you've been shrinking to fit a space that was never meant to hold you. That was when I started separating things. Not emotionally, I'd been doing that for a while, but practically, I kept one savings account Carol didn't know about. Not because I planned to leave, but because I planned to never be trapped. I kept paperwork in a fireproof box at work, not at home. I updated beneficiaries quietly. I learned the value of preparation without announcement. Carol mistook my calm for compliance. She always had. When Emily got engaged, the wedding planning became a full-time performance. Guest lists, venues, menus. Everything had to signal success. Carol talked about the day as if it were proof of something, her resilience, her status, her worth. I listened, I nodded, I paid my share. And I decided then what my gift would be. Not something loud, not something she could control. Something solid, something real. By the time the invitations went out, the plan was already finished. I didn't rehearse it. I didn't need to. I just needed to wait for the moment when truth and arrogance would collide. That moment came sooner than I expected. When Carol dropped the booklet on the floor and called it worthless, she thought she was ending the story. She didn't realize she was starting it. The thing about weddings is that they create a kind of temporary amnesia. People forget who they really are because the day demands a version of them that fits the script: smiling, forgiving, generous, celebratory. Anything that doesn't match that tone is treated like a disruption, something to be smoothed over quickly so the photos don't suffer. That's why Carol felt safe humiliating me. She believed the setting would protect her. When I stepped back into the reception hall after handing the booklet to the man outside, nothing looked different at first. The band played on. Servers moved between tables with practiced grace. Glasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell in waves. If you didn't know what to listen for, you'd think the night was unfolding exactly as planned. But I knew what to listen for. Whispers don't travel the same way music does. They move in short, nervous bursts. They stop when someone important turns their head. They restart somewhere else, softer, sharper. I felt them before I heard them. I took a seat at an empty table near the back, not hidden, just out of the spotlight. My place had always been on the edge of things. It felt natural. I loosened my tie slightly and rested my hands on the tablecloth, palms down. They weren't shaking. That surprised me again. Across the room, Carol leaned in close to Janet, her sister. Janet's mouth tightened. Janet looked toward the doors, then back at Carol. Their heads bent together, conspiratorial. Emily stood with her husband near the dance floor, nodding as someone spoke to them. Her smile had lost its shine. It flickered now like a light with a loose wire. She kept glancing toward her mother, then scanning the room as if searching for something she couldn't name. I watched all of it without moving. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne flutes. One of the glasses rattled softly against another. The sound cut through me more sharply than the music. It reminded me of how fragile these performances were, how easily one small disturbance could expose the structure underneath. Carol spotted me then. She excused herself from Janet and crossed the room with purpose. Her smile was gone by the time she reached my table. "Where is it?" she asked quietly, leaning down so no one else could hear. I met her eyes. I took care of it. Her jaw tightened. "That wasn't funny, Mark." "I didn't think it was." She straightened, scanned the room again. "You embarrassed me." I almost laughed, almost. Instead, I said, "You dropped it." Her lips parted, then pressed together. She wasn't used to me correcting her, especially not in public, especially not calmly. Before she could respond, someone tapped her shoulder. A friend, a colleague, another person who needed her attention, her charm, her version of the story. Carol forced her smile back into place and turned away, already rewriting the moment in her head. That was the first crack. The second came when the coordinator, a young man with an earpiece and the permanent look of someone managing 5 small disasters at once, hurried past my table toward the doors. He stopped and spoke briefly with a server, then glanced back into the room, eyes searching. When his gaze landed on me, he hesitated. That hesitation mattered. I looked away first. The music shifted to a slower song. Couples moved to the dance floor. Applause followed. Someone called out a toast that landed flat. Glasses rose anyway. People drank because that's what you do when you don't know what else to do. At my table, 2 older guests sat down, mistaking it for their own. They apologized when they realized the place cards didn't match, but one of them lingered, studying me with mild curiosity. "You with the bride?" he asked. "By marriage," I said. He nodded as if that explained everything. His wife leaned in and murmured something I couldn't hear. They moved on. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Carol's movements became sharper, less fluid. She checked her phone twice in quick succession, then slipped it into her clutch as if it had burned her. Janet whispered urgently now, no longer pretending discretion. Emily's husband stepped away to take a call. Emily followed him halfway, then stopped, watching Carol instead. Her hands clenched and unclenched around the stem of her glass. I felt it then, the shift. Not panic yet. Confusion. The moment when people sense something is wrong, but don't know where to assign blame. It's an uncomfortable place to be. Humans hate uncertainty more than bad news. That's why the door opening drew so much attention. It wasn't dramatic. No crash, no shouting. Just the soft creak of wood and a rush of cooler air. But bodies turned instinctively. Conversations trailed off. The man from outside stood just inside the threshold. He looked smaller under the lights. His jacket hung loosely on his shoulders. His hair, gray and unkempt, caught the glow from the string lights in a way that made him seem almost out of place, like someone accidentally dropped into the wrong scene. He held the booklet in both hands. The coordinator moved first, intercepting him with a polite but firm expression. They spoke briefly. The man shook his head, eyes darting nervously around the room. He pointed not at Carol, not at Emily, but toward the back. Toward me. The coordinator followed his gesture. 30 minutes had passed. The first scream wasn't loud, it was startled. A sharp intake of breath from someone near the door who recognized the social transgression before they understood the reason for it. Carol turned slowly. When she saw the booklet in his hands, the color drained from her face so fast it startled me. Not embarrassment, not anger. Fear. She moved toward the door with a speed that finally drew real attention. Janet followed. The coordinator raised a hand trying to manage the situation, but it was too late. The man took one uncertain step forward and spoke, voice carrying farther than he expected. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm looking for the man who gave me this." The room went still. Carol's head snapped toward me. And for the first time that night, she didn't look in control of the story. She looked like someone who had just realized the audience wasn't on her side anymore. Silence doesn't arrive all at once. It moves in layers. First, the music kept playing because the band hadn't been told to stop. Then a few conversations sputtered out one by one as people realized they were the only ones still speaking. Finally, the room settled into that thin, brittle quiet that feels louder than noise ever could. The man stood frozen just inside the doorway, clutching the booklet like it might disappear if he loosened his grip. He looked like someone who had wandered into a courtroom by mistake, uncertain where to stand, who to address, or how much trouble he was already in. The coordinator stepped closer to him. "Sir," he said carefully, "this is a private event." The man swallowed. "I know, I'm sorry. I wouldn't have come in," but he hesitated, then lifted the booklet slightly. "There's a number in here. A big one. I thought it was a mistake." That was when the murmurs began. Not laughter, not outrage, recognition. People leaned toward one another. Faces shifted from curiosity to calculation. A few older guests straightened in their chairs, eyes narrowing as they tried to get a better look at the object in his hands. Carol recovered first, she always did. She stepped forward, smile reappearing with impressive speed. "I'm so sorry," she said brightly, as if this were nothing more than a scheduling mix-up. "This gentleman seems confused. That item doesn't belong to him." She reached out. The man flinched and pulled the booklet closer to his chest. "I was told it was mine," he said, voice shaky but firm. "He gave it to me, outside." Her smile tightened again. That was a misunderstanding. "No," he said, "it wasn't." People shifted. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Somewhere near the bar, a glass tipped over and shattered, the sound echoing too loudly in the tense space. I stood. Not quickly, not dramatically. I pushed my chair back, smoothed the front of my jacket, and walked toward them at a pace that felt almost exaggerated in its calm. Every step drew more eyes. Every eye carried a different question. When I reached the man, I stopped at a respectful distance. "You did the right thing," I said to him. "Thank you for coming back." Carol turned to me incredulous. "Mark, what are you doing?" I looked at her then. Really looked. The careful makeup, the rigid posture, the way her fingers curled into her clutch like it was a lifeline. "I'm answering a question," I said. She lowered her voice. "You're humiliating us." "No," I said, "I'm not." The man cleared his throat. "Sir," he said to me, I took a picture of the pages. Just in case. I sent it to my nephew. He works at a bank. I didn't know what else to do. That landed. Not like a bomb, like a lock clicking into place. Carol's hand twitched. Janet swore under her breath. I saw Emily's face, then really saw it. The confusion had sharpened into something else. Suspicion. She looked from the booklet to her mother, then to me and back again. "Mom," she said quietly, "what is that?" Carol laughed too loud. "It's nothing. An old passbook. Your stepfather has always been sentimental about junk." A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Someone near the front shook their head slightly. An older man leaned toward his wife and whispered, "Those aren't junk." Emily's voice wavered. "Then why are you acting like this?" Carol snapped her head toward her. "Because this is inappropriate." I reached out, then palm open, not to take the booklet, but to steady the moment. "It was meant to be a gift," I said, For you. Emily's breath caught. A gift. Yes, I said. Not for show. Not for tonight. For later. For what she asked. For when life gets expensive, I said simply, and unpredictable. The man looked between us, overwhelmed. I don't want trouble, he said. If it's not mine, I don't want it. I nodded. I understand. Carol seized the opening. There, you see, give it back. We'll deal with this later. Later, I repeated. That's the problem. Her eyes flashed. You don't get to decide that. I met her gaze. I already did. I turned to the man. Would you be willing to show them the photo you took? He hesitated, then nodded. He fumbled for his phone, hands shaking, and held it out. The screen glowed bright in the dim room, reflecting off anxious faces. I didn't need to look. I knew what it showed. The murmurs grew louder. A few guests leaned closer, curiosity overpowering etiquette. Someone raised their own phone, recording now openly. Carol took a step back. Stop this, she hissed, right now. Emily took a step forward. No, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Don't. Everyone froze again. Emily looked at me. Why don't I know about this? I exhaled slowly, because it was never supposed to be a performance. The coordinator hovered uselessly at the edge of the group. The band had stopped playing at some point, though no one could have said when. The room felt suspended, like a breath held too long. Carol's composure cracked. This is outrageous, she snapped. You're ruining my daughter's wedding. I shook my head. You ruined it when you decided silence was safer than truth. Her face reddened. You wanted attention. No, I said, I wanted dignity. The word hung there, heavy and unmistakable. The man lowered his phone. Sir, he said to me almost apologetically, should I leave? In a moment, I said, please. Carol stared at me as if seeing a stranger. What do you want? She demanded. I didn't answer right away. I looked around the room, the carefully arranged tables, the strained smiles, the people who suddenly understood they were witnesses, not guests. I want this to be clear, I said finally. This wasn't thrown away because it was worthless. Carol opened her mouth. It was thrown away, I continued, because it mattered. No one laughed this time. And somewhere behind me, I heard a sharp intake of breath as the truth began to spread faster than anyone could stop it. Panic doesn't always look like screaming. Sometimes it looks like politeness collapsing in slow motion. A woman near the bar laughed, one short, brittle sound, then covered her mouth as if she'd swallowed something sharp. A man in a navy suit leaned toward his wife, whispering too quickly, his eyes fixed on Carol's face instead of the bride's. The older guests didn't speak at all. They watched the way people watch a storm forming over the ocean, quiet, knowing already, calculating what will be damaged first. Carol tried to reclaim the moment with volume. This is a misunderstanding, she said, turning slightly so her voice would carry across the nearest tables. My husband has been emotional lately. He's been doing strange things. Please, everyone, let's not let this distract from Emily's day. Emily's day. She said it the way a person says my house when the roof is already burning. Emily looked like she'd been slapped. Not by a hand, but by the realization that her mother had been performing for the room, even now, especially now. Mom, she said again, firmer, stop. Carol's eyes flicked to her, then away. She couldn't help it. She was still scanning the crowd, still measuring who believed what, still trying to keep the narrative clean. Janet stepped in beside her like a bodyguard. Mark, she said, voice dripping with false concern, why don't you step outside? You're clearly not well. I almost smiled, almost. You've never once asked if I was well, I said. Not until the moment you thought people might listen to me. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not agreement exactly. Interest. The kind that turns a room from a party into an audience. The man Ray, I learned later though at that moment, he was just the stranger holding the wrong object in the wrong place, shifted his weight nervously. He kept the passbook close to his chest, shoulders hunched as if expecting someone to grab him. I don't want trouble, he repeated, voice quiet. I just didn't want to. I didn't want to steal. No one's accusing you, I said, and then glanced at Carol because we both knew that wasn't true. Carol's mouth tightened. Give it to me, she said to him, losing the smile now, letting the command show. Right now. Ray flinched again. I sent the pictures, he blurted as if confessing to something. I'm sorry, I thought if it was important, someone would try to take it. That's what happens. That right there was the line that broke the room. Because it wasn't about money anymore. It was about instinct. Survival. The kind of truth people don't like hearing at weddings because it doesn't match the flowers. Carol's face went pale again. What pictures, she asked too fast. Ray swallowed. The account pages, the numbers, the name. The name Emily echoed almost to herself. She stepped closer, bouquet forgotten at her side. Whose name, she asked. Carol snapped, Emily, don't. But Emily didn't stop. She turned her eyes to me. Mark, she said, and her voice changed on my name. Softer, less guarded. What is this? I looked at her and felt something shift in me that I hadn't expected. Not affection, at least not the kind people write about. More like a quiet sense of responsibility. The kind you feel when you've watched someone grow up in a house full of mirrors and you realize they've never seen a clean reflection. It's an old savings passbook, I said. The kind people used before everything went digital. A younger guest scoffed somewhere behind us, but an older woman near the front, silver hair pearls posture, like she'd lived through hard years, shot him a look that shut him up immediately. Emily's brows knit. Okay, and why? I kept my voice level. Because I know how life starts after weddings. The photos end, the gifts get packed away, rent is still due, insurance, repairs, medical bills, things no one wants to talk about under string lights. Carol hissed, stop making this about money. I turned to her. You made it about money when you called it worthless. The room reacted to that. A few heads nodded before their owners caught themselves. Someone's phone camera tilted, tracking us. Janet took a step forward, eyes hard. You're accusing Carol of something at her daughter's wedding. I answered calmly, I'm letting people see who she is when she thinks no one will question her. Carol's voice rose. I threw it down because it was humiliating. Why, Emily demanded, suddenly loud enough to cut through everything. The room went still again. That question, why, was sharper than any accusation. Carol stared at her daughter, stunned that Emily had asked it publicly. Because she snapped, then stopped. She couldn't say the real reason out loud, not without admitting the fear underneath it. Because she recognized it. Because she knew what it meant. Because she knew what else might be tucked inside it. Emily turned to me, eyes widening. What else is in there, she whispered. I didn't respond immediately. I reached out gently to Ray. May I asked. He hesitated, then held the passbook out with both hands like it was sacred or dangerous. His fingers trembled as he released it. The cover was damp from earlier. Ice water had soaked into the edges where Carol had dropped it. It smelled faintly of cold metal and paper. It looked like nothing, like a relic, like a joke. And that was exactly why Carol had felt safe tossing it aside. I opened it just enough to see the familiar ink, the old-style formatting, the pages that carried years of discipline in quiet lines. My name was there. Dates, deposits, not flashy steady. Emily's eyes followed the movement of my hands. Mark, she said, voice trembling. Now why is your name in it? I met her gaze. Because I built it. Carol barked a laugh. Oh, please. Built what you can, barely. Carol, Emily said, and the way she said it, flat warning, made even Janet step back. I continued calm. I started that account before I ever met your mother. I kept it for 15 years, a little at a time, because that's what people do when they don't have the luxury of pretending. Carol's cheeks flushed. So you're trying to impress her now, with your little secret account. It wasn't a secret to impress anyone, I said. It was a safety net. Emily swallowed hard. For who? I let the silence do the work for a second. Then I said, for you, if you wanted it. Carol's eyes widened, then narrowed. No, she said sharp. Absolutely not. The word came out like a reflex, not protective, possessive. And that more than anything was what made the room tilt. Emily's husband finally stepped forward, voice tight. Mark, this isn't the time. Emily turned on him, startled. Then when is the time? When my mother decides what I'm allowed to know. He faltered. His eyes darted to Carol, then to the guests. He wasn't thinking about Emily. He was thinking about damage control. I watched Emily see that, watched her process it, watched the last of her bridal shine fade into something older, harder. Carol stepped toward me, voice low and furious. Give that to me. I didn't move. Mark, she hissed, you're playing with fire. I looked at her steady. No, I said. I'm holding paper. You're the one burning. A stunned hush followed. Even Janet stopped breathing for a second. Ray spoke again softly from the side. Sir, he said, I can show the photos. The ones I sent. My nephew, he said this is real. He said, this is serious. Show them, Emily said, and her voice didn't shake this time. Ray lifted his phone. And the moment the screen turned outward, glowing in the dim barn light, the panic Carol had been fighting finally spilled into her eyes. Because the photo didn't just show numbers. It showed something else. Something folded into the pages like a hidden blade. A small yellowed slip of paper, half visible, half tucked away, bearing handwriting that wasn't mine. Emily leaned in, breath-catching. What is that? She whispered. I stared at the paper, feeling my stomach tighten for the first time that night. Because I recognized the urgency in the way it was folded. And I realized this wasn't only about my gift. It was about a truth someone had tried to bury long before I ever joined this family. The paper didn't look like much. It never does. It was small, folded too many times, edges softened by years of being hidden and handled. The ink had faded just enough to tell you it wasn't written recently, but not enough to erase the urgency behind it. That urgency lived in the creases in the way someone had folded it quickly, like they were afraid of being interrupted. Emily leaned closer, eyes fixed on Ray's phone screen. That she said quietly, that handwriting? Carol lunged forward before she could finish. That's nothing, she snapped. An old note. Trash someone stuffed in there. Her reaction came too fast, too sharp. I held up a hand not to stop her, but to slow the room. Carol, I said evenly, you didn't know about that paper. She froze. For half a second, no one breathed. Then she recovered, but it was sloppy now. Of course I did, she said. I've seen everything in that account. I shook my head. You've never opened it. A few guests murmured. Someone near the back said, oh, the way people do when a puzzle piece clicks into place. Emily's gaze flicked between us. Mark, she said, what is that note? I took the passbook from Ray gently. My fingers brushed the damp pages until I found the fold. I didn't unfold it yet. I didn't need to. I already knew what it meant to me. It's not mine, I said. I didn't put it there. Carol laughed again, brittle. So now you're blaming a ghost. I looked at Emily. It's from your mother. The word landed like a dropped plate. The room didn't explode, it contracted. Emily went very still. My mother, she repeated. You mean your biological mother, I said. Yes. Carol's face drained of color. This is disgusting, she said. You're weaponizing the dead. Emily turned to her eyes wide. You told me there were no letters. You said she didn't leave anything. Carol's mouth opened, then closed. I told you what you needed to hear. That was it? Not a confession exactly, but close enough. I unfolded the paper slowly. The handwriting was neat but hurried, slanted slightly to the right. The kind of writing people develop when they've learned to be efficient with the truth. I didn't read it aloud at first. I let Emily see it. Her hands trembled as she took the passbook from me. She stared at the page, lips moving silently as she read. Her breath caught halfway through and she pressed a hand to her mouth. Carol stepped forward again. Emily, don't. Stop, Emily said, and this time the word cracked. Just stop. She kept reading. Around us, the room felt suspended. No music, no chatter. Just the sound of breathing and the faint hum of the lights overhead. Emily looked up at me, eyes shining. She knew, she whispered. She knew something was wrong. I nodded. That's what it says. Carol shook her head. You don't know that. You don't know what she meant. Emily turned to her, fury finally cutting through the shock. Then why did you hide it? Carol's voice rose. Because it would have confused you. Because it would have exposed you, I said quietly. Carol rounded on me. You don't get to judge me. You came into this family late. You don't understand what it took to hold things together. By lying, Emily asked, by erasing her. Carol looked at her daughter, really looked, and for a moment the mask slipped. I protected you, she said. I did what I had to do. Emily's hands curled around the paper. You decided what I was allowed to know. Her husband stepped forward again, face pale. Emily, please. This is getting out of control. She didn't even glance at him. You knew, she asked. He hesitated. That was answer enough. Emily let out a shaky breath. Everyone knew except me. I spoke then because the moment needed grounding. The note isn't long, I said. It doesn't accuse. It warns. Emily nodded, eyes never leaving her mother. She wrote, if you find this, trust your instincts. Don't let them tell you who I was. A sound escaped Carol's throat, half laugh, half sob. She was sick, she said. She was paranoid. She was scared, Emily said, and now I know why. The older woman with the pearls stepped forward. I remember her, she said gently. She asked questions. Quiet ones. Heads turned. Another older man nodded. She came to me once. About paperwork. Carol's shoulders sagged. The room was no longer hers. I took a step back. This part wasn't for me anymore. Emily folded the note carefully and slipped it into the bodice of her dress right over her heart. You don't get to touch this, she said to her mother. Ever again. Carol's voice dropped to a hiss. You're choosing him over me. Emily laughed then. Not happy, clear. No, I'm choosing myself. She turned to me. The account, she said, it's real. Yes, I said. And it's yours if you want it. No strings, no speeches. Carol lunged again. Absolutely not. Emily cut her off. You threw it away. Silence answered her. Ray shifted awkwardly near the door. Sir, he said to me, do you need me to stay? I shook my head. Thank you. You did more than you know. He nodded and backed toward the exit, eyes wide, as if he'd just survived a storm he hadn't meant to enter. Emily turned back to the room. I need air, she said, and I need space. Her husband reached for her arm. She stepped away. I'll meet you later, she said. Not now. Carol stood alone then, surrounded by people who suddenly remembered other places they needed to be. I looked at her one last time. You asked me what I wanted, I said. This is it. The truth. She stared at me with something like hatred and something like fear. I turned and walked toward the doors. Behind me, the wedding still existed. Tables were still set. The cake still waited. But the story they'd planned to tell about that night had already collapsed. And for the first time in a long while, I felt light enough to leave it behind. I didn't wait for the music to start again. I didn't wait for someone to apologize or for Carol to chase after me with a version of regret she could later revise. I walked out into the cool night air the same way I'd walked out earlier, steady, deliberate, without needing an audience to validate the decision. The parking lot looked different now, less like a backdrop, more like an exit. I sat in my car for a moment before turning the key. My hands rested on the steering wheel, and for the first time that night, they did shake, not from fear, but from release. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes when you stop holding your breath after years of pretending everything is fine. I drove away without checking my mirrors. The next morning was quiet. No dramatic calls, no slammed doors. Just a long stretch of time where the world kept moving indifferent to one family's collapse under the weight of its own secrets. Emily texted me at 7:42 a.m. Can we talk just us? I agreed to meet her at a small cafe near the river neutral ground. No history attached to it. She arrived alone wearing jeans and a sweater, hair pulled back, eyes tired but clear. The wedding ring was still on her finger. The bouquet, the dress, the performance, they were already fading. She sat across from me and placed the folded note on the table between us. I read it again, she said. Last night, slowly. I nodded. It was meant to be read that way. She wrote about a safety deposit box, Emily continued, and a policy, things I was never told existed. I know, I said. That's why I kept the account separate, in case you ever needed proof that someone had been planning for you even when they weren't allowed to be present. Emily swallowed. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to, I said simply. She looked at me for a long time. You could have exposed all of this earlier. Yes, I said, but it wouldn't have mattered then. You weren't ready to see it, and neither was anyone else. She nodded slowly, understanding more than she wanted to. We talked for an hour, about logistics, about boundaries, about what she wanted next and what she didn't. I didn't offer advice unless she asked. I didn't tell her what to feel about her mother. That wasn't my place. Before we stood to leave, she reached across the table and touched my hand. Thank you, she said, not for the money, for the way you did it. I understood what she meant. Sometimes how you tell the truth matters more than the truth itself. I moved out of the house that afternoon. No argument, no scene, just boxes and quiet rooms and the strange calm that comes when a life finally aligns with itself. Carol didn't try to stop me. She didn't need to. Control only works when the other person still wants something from you. I wanted nothing. Weeks passed, then months. The story of the wedding spread, of course. Stories always do, but not in the way Carol feared, not as gossip, as recognition. People saw themselves in it, in the silences, the compromises, the years spent shrinking to keep someone else comfortable. I heard that Emily delayed the honeymoon, that she started asking questions, that she found things no one had expected her to find. I heard that Carol stopped hosting dinners. I didn't follow up. Because revenge when done right doesn't require supervision. If there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's that dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't raise its voice or demand an apology. It waits, it prepares, and when the moment comes, it stands where it is and lets the truth do the walking. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever been humiliated quietly or made to feel small for the things you built with your own hands, I want you to know this. You're not alone, and silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's just the calm before clarity. I'd like to know where you're listening from. Leave a comment below and tell me. And if you want to follow more stories like this, stories about quiet strength, hard-earned truth, and what happens when people finally stop playing the roles assigned to them, make sure to subscribe. We have many more to share, and I'd be glad to continue this journey with you.